I thought a near-fatal accident would finally make my family see me, support me, even love me. Instead, as I lay broken in a hospital bed, they flooded our group chat with beach selfies and vacation photos, like my pain didn't exist. That was the moment I realized I was on my own. Before the accident, life looked deceptively steady. On the surface, my family and I seemed close enough to fool neighbors, friends, even myself. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Austin, Texas, the kind of place where kids sold lemonade in cul-de-sacs and families waved from porches on Sunday afternoons. My parents, Richard and Lillian, loved appearances. To them, the family image was everything. I'm Emma, the oldest of three. My younger brother, Lucas, was the golden boy, varsity soccer captain, straight-A student, the one who could do no wrong. My sister, Grace, was the family charmer, always smiling, always indulged. And me. I was the reliable one, the responsible daughter who worked part-time at a cafe, juggled classes, and kept the fridge stocked when Mom forgot. I wasn't flashy, but I was steady, and I thought, deep down, that steadiness mattered. Our dinners looked perfect on the outside. Mom's casseroles steaming on the table, Dad pouring iced tea, everyone chatting about school or neighbors. But there were cracks if you knew where to look. When Lucas scored a goal, the table erupted in cheers. When Grace posted a selfie that got 100 likes, Mom gushed. When I shared that I aced a midterm after weeks of late-night study, Dad would nod absently and change the subject. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that love wasn't always loud, that being overlooked wasn't the same as being forgotten. I filled the silence with optimism. They'll see me when it really counts. That hope carried me through long shifts at the cafe, late-night cram sessions, and weekends when I drove Grace to the mall because Mom didn't want to. I told myself we were a team, a family, and that if I ever needed them, really needed them, they would show up. The accident hadn't happened yet. At that point, I was still naive enough to believe family meant unconditional support, that deep down they cared, even if they showed it clumsily. I remember one Friday evening vividly. It was right before everything changed. I came home exhausted, smelling of coffee grounds, my hands aching from hours on the espresso machine. I dropped my bag, expecting the usual quiet. Instead, the living room was alive with laughter. Lucas had just been accepted into a regional soccer camp, and the whole family was celebrating with pizza and balloons. "Emma," Mom called, waving me in. "Grab a slice before it's gone." I forced a smile, sitting down. Nobody asked how my shift went, but I told myself not to care. I looked at Lucas, glowing under their attention, and thought, one day, that'll be me. One day, they'll celebrate me like that. I clung to that thought like a lifeline. Because when you grow up starved of recognition, hope becomes the only meal you get. That was the illusion I lived in, an illusion of stability, of belonging. I told myself I was part of a loving family, even as the evidence whispered otherwise. And then came the night that tore the curtain down. The first warning sign came quietly, almost too small to notice, but it lodged in my chest like a splinter. It was a rainy Tuesday, just a week after Lucas's big soccer celebration. I was walking home from the bus stop, my umbrella flipping inside out in the wind, my backpack soaked through. By the time I stumbled into the kitchen, dripping, Mom and Dad were already seated, phones glowing in their hands. Grace lounged on the counter, scrolling through Instagram. "Rough day?" I asked, peeling off my jacket. My teeth chattered, my hair plastered to my forehead. Nobody looked up. Finally, Grace snorted. "Emma, could you not drip on the counter?" I just wiped it down. I blinked. "Seriously? I'm soaked, and that's what you notice." Mom sighed without lifting her eyes. Grace worked hard cleaning. "You should be more considerate." That was it. "No, are you okay?" No towel, no warmth. Just a reminder that even drenched to the bone, I was an inconvenience. I brushed it off, telling myself they were distracted. But deep down, something sharp twisted in my stomach. The feeling grew stronger days later. I had saved up enough tips from the cafe to buy new running shoes, cheap ones, but mine. I was proud, walking into the living room to show them off. Lucas laughed. "Wow, Emma, those look like clown shoes." Grace giggled, snapping a photo without asking. "I'm posting this, when your sister thinks she's fashionable." I begged her not to, but the picture went up anyway. Within minutes, the comments rolled in, friends piling on the mockery. I ran upstairs, humiliated. Not one adult voice defended me. Not one parent said, "Enough." It should have been a small thing, but it wasn't. It was the first undeniable clue that I wasn't just overlooked, I was the family's punchline. The final straw came the night of my accident. It was a Thursday, and I'd stayed late at the cafe, covering a shift for a coworker. By the time I clocked out, the roads were slick with rain. I debated calling Dad for a ride, but I knew the answer already. He'd grumble about being tired from work, about gas prices. He'd remind me that Lucas needed to rest for practice, that Grace had school early. My needs always ranked last. So I got behind the wheel of my beat-up sedan, headlights cutting through the downpour. I should have been more careful. Maybe I should have pulled over when the rain turned into sheets of glass, when the roads blurred. But exhaustion and pride kept me going. And then, it happened. A screech of tires, a flash of light, metal crunching. My body slammed forward, seatbelt digging into my chest. Pain bloomed white-hot. Then darkness. When I woke, I was in the ER, monitors beeping, doctors murmuring. My first thought wasn't, am I okay? It was, where's my family? Surely, this would be the moment they showed up. But the waiting room was empty. No mom, no dad, no siblings. Just silence. And when I checked our family group chat, my heart plummeted. While I was being wheeled into surgery, they were posting. Lucas had uploaded a grinning selfie at a burger joint. Grace had shared a photo of her new bikini. My parents had commented with heart emojis, cheering them on. Not a single word about me. Not a single, how's Emma? It wasn't the accident that broke me, it was that. That was the first warning bell, loud enough to shatter the illusion. My pain was invisible to them. My existence was background noise, easily drowned out by vacations, selfies, and soccer games. And once you hear a bell like that, you can't unhear it. When I was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, I told myself the accident might change things. That maybe, finally, my family would realize how fragile life was. That maybe they'd see me not as the background character in their perfect family story, but as their daughter, their sister, someone worth caring about. I was wrong. Dad picked me up from the hospital, and the ride home was thick with silence. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, knuckles white around the steering wheel. I wanted him to ask me how I felt, if the pain in my ribs was manageable, if I was scared to drive again. Instead, the only thing he said was, "You're lucky the car wasn't totaled. We can't afford another expense right now." That was his priority, the car, not me. When we got home, I hobbled into the living room, expecting hugs, maybe some small gesture of comfort. Grace barely glanced up from her phone. Lucas muttered a distracted, "Hey," his eyes glued to the TV. Mom asked if I could move my hospital bag out of the hallway because it was cluttering the space. I stood there, stunned, waiting for warmth that never came. That night, as I lay in bed, scrolling through our family group chat, I wanted to cry. It was flooded with more vacation photos. Lucas at the lake with his friends, Grace showing off yet another shopping spree. My accident, my hospital stay, it was as if they had collectively erased it. And worse, I realized they were doing it on purpose. When I tried to bring it up, the walls closed in. At dinner, I said quietly, "It really hurt that none of you visited me in the hospital." Mom looked offended, like I had just insulted her cooking. "Emma, don't be dramatic. We knew you were fine. The doctors said it was minor." Minor. I sputtered. I could barely breathe from the cracked ribs. I needed stitches. Lucas shrugged. "You're walking now, right? So what's the big deal?" Grace chimed in, rolling her eyes. "Not everything is about you, Emma. Honestly, you make such a big production out of things. We had our lives too, you know." My jaw dropped. I had nearly died, and somehow I was being painted as selfish for wanting their support. From then on, every attempt I made to talk about my accident, to talk about how abandoned I felt, was met with dismissive laughter or outright annoyance. "Stop playing the victim. You're too sensitive. You always want attention." It was gaslighting, plain and simple. They twisted my reality until I began to question myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe expecting them to care was too much. But the truth still clawed at me in the quiet moments. I was alone. My so-called support system had collapsed, leaving me stranded. I couldn't lean on Mom for comfort, or Dad for reassurance. Grace mocked me, and Lucas treated me like dead weight. Even outside the house, the isolation grew. Grace spread the story that my accident was overblown, that I had milked it for sympathy. Soon, friends at school whispered behind my back. People stopped asking how I was, stopped offering rides, stopped checking in. It was like the accident had branded me as fragile, inconvenient, not worth the effort. The pressure built until I felt like I was suffocating. Every group chat ping from my family was another reminder. They had joy, laughter, connection, and I had nothing. And the cruelest part? I still wanted their love. Even as they ignored me, I kept scrolling through their photos, hoping for a single comment that said, "We wish you were here." It never came. The walls of my world shrank smaller and smaller, the loneliness pressing against my chest harder than any seatbelt ever had. And I knew, deep down, something had to give. The breaking point didn't come with shouting. It came with silence, and a single notification that shattered the last illusions I had about my family. It was a Saturday evening, a few weeks after the accident. I was sitting alone in my room, my ribs still aching every time I moved. I'd asked Mom earlier if we could do a family dinner, just something quiet at home. She brushed me off with, "Not tonight, Emma, everyone has plans." I opened our family group chat, clinging to the hope that maybe they'd check in. Maybe one of them had noticed how quiet I'd been, how much pain I was still in. Instead, what I saw made my stomach drop. They were on vacation. Not just any vacation, a spur-of-the-moment trip to Cancun. Photos filled the chat. Grace posing on the beach in a new bikini, Lucas grinning with a margarita in his hand, Mom and Dad lounging poolside. Sunsets, cocktails, hotel buffets. And me. I hadn't even been invited. The trip had been planned, discussed, and executed without a single word to me. They had left me behind, injured, recovering, alone, while they jetted off to paradise. I stared at the photos until my eyes blurred with tears. My heart pounded, my body trembling. It wasn't just neglect anymore. It was abandonment. I texted the group. "You all went on vacation without telling me?" The replies came quickly. "Grace, you would have been a downer. We didn't want to ruin the vibe." Lucas, "Chill, Emma. It was last minute. Don't make this about you." Mom, "Sweetheart, we knew you'd be fine at home. You needed rest anyway." My hands shook as I typed back. "I almost died. And you left me here, alone, like I don't matter." No one replied. The chat went silent for hours, until another flood of beach pictures arrived, as if my words had evaporated into the void. That night, something inside me cracked. I sat on my bed, replaying every moment of my childhood, every time I had excused their behavior. The way my achievements were brushed aside, the way Lucas and Grace were celebrated, the way my needs were always too much. And I realized, it wasn't an accident that they didn't care. It wasn't a mistake or a bad week. This was who they were. They didn't love me the way I loved them. They never had. The accident should have been my wake-up call, but this vacation, was the revelation I couldn't ignore. They had chosen life without me, smiling on beaches while I sat in the shadow of their neglect. For the first time, I let myself believe the unthinkable. Maybe I didn't have a family at all. Not in the way that mattered. And once that thought rooted itself in my mind, it grew into something stronger. If they wouldn't fight for me, I would have to fight for myself. When my family came back from Cancun, I was ready. I had spent those empty nights in the quiet house drafting a plan, not to win back their love, but to reclaim myself. The first step was simple. Stop waiting for them. For years, I had bent my life around their approval, chasing scraps of affection that never came. Now, every time my phone buzzed with another shallow selfie in the group chat, I muted it. I started keeping my energy for people who actually cared. It wasn't easy. The urge to scroll, to look for my name in their conversations, to hope for a flicker of recognition, it pulled at me like an addiction. But each time I resisted, I felt stronger, like I was pulling free from invisible chains. I also began documenting everything. I kept a journal of their neglect, their dismissive words, the nights I was left alone. Part of me wondered if I was being paranoid, but another part whispered that someday, proof might matter. And then I found unexpected allies. At the cafe where I worked, my manager, Rachel, noticed the bruises that still mottled my arms from the accident. She asked how recovery was going, and when I gave a half-hearted fine, she pressed gently. I cracked open, telling her everything. The hospital, the silence, the Cancun trip. Rachel's face hardened. "Emma, that's not normal. Families don't abandon each other like that." Her validation was a balm on wounds I didn't realize were still bleeding. She introduced me to a coworker, Daniel, who had been estranged from his own toxic parents for years. Over late-night shifts, Daniel shared how he built his independence, how he created a found family of friends who showed up when blood relatives didn't. For the first time, I saw a path forward. The counterstrike wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my voice. I started small. When Grace demanded a ride to the mall, I said no. When Lucas asked me to cover his chores, I replied, "Do it yourself." When Mom complained that I was being difficult, I calmly told her, "I'm not available to be your maid anymore." They didn't know how to react. Grace rolled her eyes. Wow, someone thinks she's important now. Lucas muttered, "You're so bitter, Emma." Dad snapped, "Don't disrespect this family." But I didn't back down. Each boundary I set was another brick in the wall between me and their manipulation. The real turning point came one evening when I overheard Grace on the phone with a friend. She was laughing, saying, "Emma's accident was the best thing that happened to me. Everyone stopped nagging me for a while." Her words sliced deeper than the crash ever had. But instead of crying, I wrote them down. Proof. Evidence of how little I mattered to them. I compiled everything. The photos from Cancun while I was in the hospital, the cruel texts, the overheard conversations. I didn't know yet what I would do with it, but holding that record gave me power. Meanwhile, Rachel and Daniel encouraged me to take bigger steps. Rachel offered extra shifts so I could save faster. Daniel invited me into his circle of friends, people who celebrated my wins, no matter how small. When I told them I had finished an essay early, they cheered. When I admitted I still had nightmares about the accident, they listened. That contrast lit a fire inside me. For the first time, I felt what real support looked like, and it made my family's neglect undeniable. My counterstrike wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, deliberate, built one choice at a time. But as I grew stronger, my family noticed. And they didn't like it. The shift in power didn't go unnoticed. For months I had been the quiet one, the one who bent, folded, and absorbed every slight. Now, suddenly, I was standing straighter, saying, no, creating distance. My family, so used to my silence, didn't know how to handle my voice. It all came to a head on a Sunday evening. Mom had decided, without asking me, that we were hosting a family dinner for some distant relatives. I had just finished a brutal double shift at the cafe, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. Instead, I came home to find Grace ordering me to set the table while she painted her nails, and Dad barking that the bathroom better be spotless. I refused. Calmly, but firmly. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said, dropping my bag. "I'm not your maid. I'm not your scapegoat. I'm done." The room froze. Dad's face darkened. "Excuse me." Mom crossed her arms. "Emma, don't start this nonsense. You're part of this family, and we all pull our weight." "Really?" I snapped, the months of silence breaking into fire. "Because I pulled all the weight when I was lying in the hospital, and you were in Cancun. I pulled all the weight when you mocked me instead of helping me. I pulled all the weight when you left me to recover alone. And you know what? I'm done carrying it." Grace laughed nervously. "Oh my God, Emma, you're being so dramatic again." But I was past the point of backing down. I grabbed my phone, scrolling to the folder I had named Receipts. Photos of their Cancun trip while I was in the ER. Screenshots of dismissive texts. Notes of overheard insults. Grace's cruel comment that my accident was the best thing that happened to her. I put the phone on the table. "This is who you are. I don't need to prove it to anyone but myself, but don't you dare gaslight me again. I know the truth now." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Dad's fists clenched, but he didn't speak. Grace muttered something under her breath, but for once, Lucas didn't laugh. He just looked away. I felt my chest rise and fall, my heart hammering, but beneath it all, calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging for their validation. I was holding the mirror up to their faces, and they couldn't stand the reflection. The family dinner never happened. Relatives were called and cancelled. Everyone scattered to their rooms. But I didn't retreat. I sat in the living room, breathing deeply, knowing something had shifted. The showdown wasn't about screaming or winning some argument. It was about drawing a line in permanent ink. I would never again play the role they had written for me. Later that night, Dad knocked on my door. He didn't apologize. He never would. Instead, he muttered, "If you don't like how things are, maybe you shouldn't live here." It was meant as a threat, but to me it was liberation. I looked him in the eye and said, "You're right. I won't." And for the first time, I meant it. I left 2 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of movie moment where I slammed the door and never looked back. It was quiet, methodical. I packed my clothes into 2 suitcases, stuffed my journal of receipts into my backpack, and took the bus to Daniel's place. He and his roommates had cleared out the corner of their living room for me, inflating an air mattress and stringing up a curtain for privacy. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The first night away, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of laughter drifting from Daniel's room, the muted traffic outside. My chest ached with fear. What if I couldn't make it on my own? What if my family was right, that I was too dramatic, too needy, too fragile? And then, just as the doubts threatened to drown me, my phone buzzed. A message. From Rachel, my cafe manager. Proud of you. Don't forget your shift tomorrow. We'll celebrate after. A simple text, but it anchored me. For the first time, I realized support didn't have to come from blood. Over the next weeks, the weight on my shoulders began to lift. Work became more than a paycheck. It became proof of my independence. Daniel's circle embraced me like a sister, celebrating small victories. When I paid my share of rent on time, when I cooked dinner for everyone, when I laughed without flinching. Meanwhile, my family's group chat kept buzzing. Cancun memories, Grace's selfies, Lucas's endless soccer updates. But now, I muted it for good. I no longer craved their validation. It felt like static, meaningless noise. One afternoon, I passed by the cafe mirror and barely recognized myself. The girl staring back wasn't the shadow who begged her family to see her. She was tired, yes, but she was also strong. Scarred, but still standing. The accident had nearly broken me. The neglect had nearly erased me. But it also stripped away illusions, leaving behind something raw and unshakable, resilience. Months later, I was invited to speak at a local youth center. Rachel had recommended me to a group of teens struggling with toxic families. I stood before them, palms sweating, but when I spoke, my voice didn't shake. I used to think family was everything, I said. But sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shows up when you're broken. It's who holds you together when you feel invisible. And if you don't have that yet, I promise, you can build it. You can choose it. The room was silent, then filled with applause. I smiled, not for recognition, but because I knew, this was the ending I had written for myself. My parents may never change. Grace and Lucas may always mock me. But I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need them at all. I have myself. I have friends who turned into family. And I have a future I'm no longer afraid to claim. They left me behind. But I rose anyway. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge.